talking about service above self. Specifically, we will have a lively, interactive, and sharing discussion about how a small, health-oriented nonprofit organization teamed up with an international service organization to create a self-sustaining charity operation in several Southeast Asian countries. I'm Terry, and I'm your host and moderator for this discussion. Now, I've been on 2 of those missions to Vietnam, but like many of you, I'm here to learn more. And to tell you all about that success story, I have 2 of the special people who were the main visionaries of the success stories. We have Walter Hazel, a longtime Rotary International member here in Calgary, and we also have Laverne Bissky, CEO and founder of the charity No Ordinary Journey Foundation, also based here in Calgary. Welcome to you both. Thank you so much for sitting down with all of us for this next hour or so to tell us about this success story that happened.
Thank you, Terry.
Yes, glad to be here.
To start with, why don't you tell everyone, Walter, what is Rotary International?
Rotary International started in 1905 by a man by the name of Paul Harris in Chicago. He was a wealthy businessman, and he would invite some of his colleagues to go out for lunch. And then they started the policy of rotating who would sponsor the next lunch, and they rotated around, and that's where the term Rotary comes from, because they rotated for their various meetings.
Okay.
Well, these were all wealthy people back in 1905. It was trying times, and they decided they would do some good as well as getting together and enjoy things, enjoy each other's company, and they would sponsor projects to help people that needed help, financial assistance of one kind or another, and that's where the idea of service above self comes about.
Okay.
Which is today is still Rotary's motto. The Rotary Foundation is based in Evanston, Illinois, and it assembles funds from around the world to match funds that local clubs use to do projects around the world.
So now tell us a bit about Walter and Rotary. How did Walter Hazel connect up with Rotary?
I made a lot of contacts in Alberta, in Calgary, and I was offered a job heading up the research program at the Canadian Energy Research Institute, or CERI, in which I took that job on. That led to consulting, and I consulted the rest of my working career. I consulted the oil and gas industry. 1992, I was asked to join Rotary, which I did. I served on the board for a number of years. Rotary Club of Calgary, which is a big club. I served on the board for a number of years, and that led to my involvement in all kinds of international projects with Rotary.
Nice. Now, Laverne, tell us a little bit about your charity, No Ordinary Journey Foundation.
So, No Ordinary Journey Foundation is a registered Canadian charity, and we are involved with training around the disability of cerebral palsy. And so all of our, we'll call them missions or trips, it's not in any way a religious organization, involve professionals with experience working with children who have cerebral palsy, taking those professionals to the countries in Southeast Asia and training the professionals that work with children who have cerebral palsy in those countries. And it started in Vietnam, but it's expanding from there. Good.
You said it started in Vietnam.
Yes. So I have a child who has cerebral palsy, and although I say she's my child, she is an adult. She's almost 25. And many years ago, my husband and I decided that we wanted to travel with our children in Southeast Asia, and we did a 4-month trip. And you know, that time we were really naive. Like I knew that children living with cerebral palsy in Southeast Asia especially in Vietnam, would not have expensive wheelchairs like our daughter had, and maybe the ability to travel abroad and those kind of things. But I also didn't understand the conditions that they would live under, and the fact that they would be very isolated and they would be stigmatized. And not only would they not have a wheelchair, but they wouldn't have really any kind of equipment support. So we actually witnessed children lying in their beds all day. And I guess what tugged at my heart the most was that we saw many children with disabilities, like my own daughter, that were being abandoned at orphanages. And not because they didn't have parents, but because the parents couldn't manage these children at home. So NOJF grew out of the idea that what these parents needed is supports, and that it really didn't make a lot of sense for us to just come and work with a small group of parents and then go home.
Sure.
It made a lot more sense for us to come with a group of professionals and train the therapists, doctors, nurses, and other people who are already within the community, and train them on how to work with the parents and the children to hopefully avoid these parents feeling that they had to abandon their children at orphanages.
Okay, good. Now we have No Ordinary Journey Foundation on one side, and we have Rotary International. So how did that initial meeting start?
Well, I think in the very beginning, I'll just interject, I joined Rotary in 2010. And by that time, of course, Walter was really established in Rotary, and you were training. One of the great parts about Rotary is that it's an excellent opportunity to learn to be a leader. And there's lots of training opportunities within Rotary for people who are new members like I was. But Walter remembers the exact moment that we met, don't you?
Yes. When we were doing this training, we had a big group of people in an amphitheater, and Laverne was always sitting at the same spot in the front row. She never said a word during the presentation, but after the session was over, I couldn't get any more than 10 feet away from the podium before she was on my tail asking me questions.
Okay, good.
So that's how we first met. After this training was done for a year and so forth, Laverne, sponsored by the Rotary Club of Calgary North, took on a project in Southeast Asia. And at the end of that several months program, where she was in Southeast Asia, in Vietnam, to provide this training to people with cerebral palsy and their caregivers. She made a presentation at the Rotary District Conference, and Laverne is a good presenter, and at the end of her presentation, she got a standing ovation, a very impressive presentation.
Good.
A few minutes later, I see her sitting at a table all by herself. So I went over and joined her, and I asked her, is Calgary North prepared to sponsor you on another round of this project, this area? And she said, no, they made it clear. It was a one-off.
One-off. That's it.
And so I said, let's talk. And that's how we got hooked up together.
Yeah.
So like that saying goes, never say never, and ask the question.
And I think we've done, about 6 projects together now?
Oh, yeah, at least.
At least, yeah.
Yeah.
And
Nice.
our last project was one that we actually moved to a different country because they had host clubs in that country, and we could do what's called a global grant as opposed to a district grant. A global grant has much more generous funding arrangements through Rotary International. So we moved from Vietnam to Thailand to take advantage of that program. And we put together a very big project, the biggest one we've had, probably bigger than all the rest of them put together.
Yes, exactly.
And it was a very successful project. And then COVID set in, and everything came to a screeching halt, including some work Laverne and NOJF had ongoing, and they had to abandon that and come back to Calgary.
Mm-hmm.
But in the meantime, the Rotary Club of Bangkok took it upon themselves. They saw the value of what was happening, and they took it upon themselves to initiate a global grant of their own. With the Bangkok is in southern part of Thailand, northern part of Thailand is a different district. They teamed up with the district in northern Thailand, and they got a sponsor from South Korea. The Rotary Club in South Korea sponsored. They have approval from Rotary International to proceed with a major global grant doing treatment of cerebral palsy in northern Vietnam and northern Thailand.
So a number of these projects have been already done successfully. NOJ is run very efficiently, and most of those funds got to the people on the ground in Vietnam. So kudos to you, Laverne, for doing that. And we're not talking a lot of money here, and I like to think of it as seed money, that initial boost off the ground to get going. You get their buy-in right from the start with their volunteers, with their connections with the health ministry in those countries.
Yeah, and I think in terms of Rotary, they hold very strong the principle of sustainability. And
Yes.
so I think we were already coming in with that attitude that this needs to be sustainable. We're not just going to drop in, do a little thing, and then leave.
And then
But Rotary for a long time has really focused on sustainable projects,
Absolutely.
right?
Absolutely, yes. Yes.
And what's the background to that? Like, why is the sustainability so important to Rotary?
Well, if you do a project that's sustainable, then it lasts. If you simply go in and say, "Oh well, we'll serve some meals here," and then take off, what do you have?
it collapses.
You've had
It's
a
done.
bit of a project right there, but there's nothing carry on.
Yeah.
So sustainability is really built right into all of these major projects. That's one of the. If you're doing having the review done by Rotary International, there are always questions about sustainability. It's very much of a focus.
Very good.
And I think that's why our organization and Rotary work so well together. In addition to the fact that Walter and I have a very deep respect for one another's work, I think we were both very much focused on sustainability. And by its very nature, anything that you're doing with education, once you educate somebody, you can't take that away from them. And so that became a focal point of what NOJF is doing. When people ask me to sort of summarize what NOJF is doing, I always say that what we're attempting to do is to bring hope and dignity to children who have cerebral palsy living in Southeast Asia. But underneath that, we actually use many different approaches. So, sometimes it is wheelchair projects and we're delivering wheelchairs. Sometimes it's training, sometimes it's conferences. But underneath all of that, there is an education component because education is by its nature sustainable.
Okay.
I want to emphasize that with the point you were making about training the people and educating them. That's the thing that will keep the thing going.
Yes.
And that will spill off onto other
Yes.
families that haven't been involved.
Yes,
And they'll
exactly.
say, "Oh, I got to get a wheelchair for my kid."
Yeah.
You know.
Yes.
It takes on its own life.
And from what I saw in the two missions I was on, it's not just the parents and those children that were attending these workshops. It was actually a large part where there are local professionals, the therapists, the doctors, the nurses from Vietnam, and there was also segments that was just training for them in PowerPoint and training the professionals. So the professionals were there in parallel with the parents of those children with CP and the CP children.
And so, you know, we sort of took a page out of the Rotary playbook, because our thinking was, if you train one parent how to work with one child, that benefits that parent and benefits that child. But if you train one physiotherapist or one doctor or one nurse,
or one organization like Canto.
Yes.
We went down into Canto where they had a hospital, and they invited us to come in and provide them with the training that they can take forward and apply.
Nice, nice.
But then each of those professionals not only impacts all of the parents and the families that they work with, but now what we're seeing, which I think is Walter's point, is that you've got those professionals in organizations like the Canto Hospital, and they are beginning to train each other. And at the very, very least, they are changing attitudes. And when people's attitudes change towards, for example, to really value children with disabilities and their families, that's contagious. And once you change those attitudes, then they will seek out other resources. So we've had incidents where people have attended some of our training, and then they will say, well, can you provide more documentation afterwards? Like, we want to supplement our teaching and we want to share it with our colleagues. So I think that's the basis of sustainability.
It is.
Isn't it? It's when you can see it rippling out.
Right. And the word has gotten out, and we get approached by organizations we didn't even know about.
Really?
For example, the Australians approached us,
Yes.
providing the wheelchairs.
Yes.
I mean, that's a Rotary operation again. Rotary in Australia heard about what we were doing, and they said, can we get involved and provide wheelchairs?
Yes.
And we said yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Why not?
And that was about 600 wheelchairs they were donating
Yeah.
to Vietnam.
Yeah. Yes. And so I think that Walter's first point is really, really important in terms of how do you make these projects successful. One of the key things is the synergies of working together. So in this wheelchair project, which we just did last September and was our very first wheelchair project, the sustainability piece was, first of all, that we were training the professionals on how to provide these wheelchairs to children with cerebral palsy.
In Vietnam.
Yes, in Vietnam, because kids with CP, they're oftentimes their whole posture and movement is affected. You can't just take a wheelchair and put a kid with CP in it and send them home and hope for the best. Those wheelchairs have to be specifically fitted to that child so that you don't create more problems in terms of things like scoliosis, or even just in terms of safety, like the child falling out of the wheelchair. So the people on the ground have to be trained on how to specifically fit that wheelchair to the child. Of course, they're children, so they're growing, so someone needs to monitor it and to keep that going. So that was the first piece about the sustainability, is that that making sure that training was happening, and that's NOJF's piece.
Sure.
And then the Australian piece, where they come in, is with their synergies, because they donate the wheelchairs, but they're only going to donate them to countries where there are trained professionals to fit them and to monitor them, and to make sure that everything's sort of going forward.
Sure. Mm-hmm. So those professionals in Vietnam were trained at how to initially set up and maintain those wheelchairs so they could keep that going year after year on their own.
Yeah, exactly. And not only maintain the wheelchairs that the kids already have, but additional wheelchairs can come and they can distribute them. And again, they're training their colleagues.
As well.
They're
yeah.
going to be training their colleagues on
Sure.
how to do
So that project finished most recently, and now we're in the midst of COVID, which kind of froze everything. So are there any projects pending that still have to be completed maybe once?
The wheelchair project isn't complete yet, is it?
No, it isn't. We
Okay.
were supposed to go and do a follow-up with the wheelchair project, and we're also hoping to bring additional projects. But COVID is really kind of, putting a halt to that. And we're really thinking about ways that we can go forward, using electronic media. But unfortunately with cerebral palsy, because this is something that we've been thinking about for a long time, how can we deliver information without a team of people actually having to go there and be there? And COVID is causing us to think about that a little bit more. But the problem is that the work that we're doing is very, very hands-on, and it's really, really difficult to
Explain that over
yeah,
Zoom.
yeah, that's
How can you explain over a Zoom camera or video or whatever, how to adjust a wheelchair to each individual
Yeah,
child's
that might
requirements?
be a
It's
little tough.
impossible. You can't
Yeah.
do it. You have to be there in person.
You
Yeah,
have to be
exactly.
there, yeah.
Because the real issue is that every child is different, and
Yes.
it's very, very difficult to actually assess a child if you can't touch them and you can't ask for them to be positioned in a certain way.
And
And-
show the parents what they need to do
Yes.
to get their kids sitting in there comfortably.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's
Exactly.
not something you can explain over the phone.
You might be able to deliver the initial, the holistic, the higher level over a video
Yeah.
screen. Learn much faster by doing.
And it's not only that type of learning, but it's sort of the social learning as well. Because as I said before, really whether it's wheelchairs or conferences or therapy training, our goal is really to change attitudes. And what we find is the best way to do that is having these therapists together, having a discussion about the way the situation is now, and having them interact and having them actually work with the children and the families
Okay.
is a huge thing, because our whole goal is stewardship for them. We don't want to have to be the driving force for every project, which is what Walter's talking about when he's talking about sustainability and what has happened when the people in Thailand, the Rotarians, realize the value of what we're doing, and then they're moving it forward in a sustainable way.
Sure.
What they've really done, the word that I would use is stewardship. They've taken ownership of it. They're now driving the bus.
Good.
We showed them where the key is, but
Good,
they're
good.
the ones that are driving the
Sure,
bus,
that's
and that's
great.
absolutely critical to sustainability.
So that wheelchair project still has to have a follow-up mission, and I guess we're sort of waiting until COVID kind of flattens out a bit
Yeah,
to get
and
somebody there in person.
yeah, so the trainees that we have went home to their cities and their hospitals, and they have the complete package of information. They're actually fitting wheelchairs. They've been given some wheelchairs and they're fitting them. But the next part of the project was really to go on site and do a follow-up and answer any questions. Because sometimes you do a training and then you go home and it's not as easy to figure
Yes.
out how to implement it in your own environment.
Sure.
But they have enough information, and they had hands-on information to be able to go home and do it. But just in the interest of being thorough, we intend to go back and visit every site. But we always welcome them
Good.
to contact us by email or by Zoom or by whatever method and ask questions. But sometimes the language barrier is a bit daunting for them.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, and I remember from one of the missions I was on, there were a lot of professionals there present and taking part. In fact, you had one volunteer from Vietnam who stepped forward and volunteered himself to pre-screen all of their volunteers
Yes.
to make sure that they have probably more than anything, not just a desire to get a star on their card that
Yeah.
they took part in this, but they have an interest, a commitment
Yes.
to help out in taking it forward, like taking ownership of it,
Yeah.
so that the training they learn, they can now use to train others of theirs in their respective university or to hospital
Yeah.
or clinic that they work at.
Yes.
So that's a big step.
Yeah. The other thing is that you can be very thorough in the training and do a really bang-up job, but it's still important to have a follow-up because there are things that fall through the crack that need to be corrected
Yes, it's
and
true.
adjusted and take it to the next step.
Sure.
And this, going back and paying another visit back there and checking up on things is very important.
Sure. Because the way we do things here, we might not realize they can't quite do it the same way because of cultural differences, politics, whatever. So
Yeah.
things have to be adjusted so that it works for them in their local countries. Right. Good. So if we were to wrap up, if somebody wanted to start a self-sustaining operation or mission or project to some country like this, it sounds like Rotary already has at its core service above self, and Laverne, you mentioned NOG as well, had the very similar, still has at its core, where you're not just there to help the parents and the children with CP, but you're their big part component is to train their professionals that they take ownership of it right from, and they know it.
Yeah.
The other good thing about all of this is that Rotary is around the world. We have projects, we have clubs in pretty well every civilized country around the world, and these are all things you can piggyback on. You can start from there and
Sure.
build up from there.
Sure, just with a little bit of seed money,
Yeah.
a small project.
And I think that is true, but I think that part of where the synergies come from is, say, for example, Walter has experience from being in Ghana and also much experience working with international Rotary projects. So Walter, and there are other Rotarians that our organization has relied on to guide us through some of the maybe the political and logistical challenges that we come up against. So
That's great.
I think that if sustainability is our goal, then synergy is one of the key points that need to be addressed, and as many possible partners working together
Good.
moves us
Synergy,
to,
like
yeah,
that word.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the other thing is that you have Rotarians that get experience in a lot of different places.
Yes.
So I've been involved in Rotary projects all over Latin America, the United States, all over Africa, Asia, and so they're all a little bit different. But every time you go into one of these countries, you learn something, and you can apply that somewhere
Sure.
else. And this international Rotary International is a phenomenal organization in that respect.
Nice. Good. So I heard one word, synergy. I heard a second one, which the big one is sustainability, and you have a third.
Stewardship.
Stewardship.
Yeah.
So synergy, sustainability, and stewardship. The whole picture that from the first day both of you met at a Rotary meeting, and lessons learned about setting up these projects, any kind of feedback you can give, because the whole purpose of us talking today is to try and encourage other chapters of Rotary worldwide to also look at doing seed projects in conjunction with local Rotary groups in order to create a core project that eventually will be taken over at that local level and maintained and carried through.
There is something else I have to throw out.
Sure.
This COVID issue is a major issue that is affecting all kinds of things, including rules set out by Rotary International. And it is not going to be the same going forward.
Okay.
So you have to keep your eyes open and roll with the punches.
Sure. Synergy, sustainability, and stewardship. Postmortems, doing an after. I know when I was there, what I liked, we had the daily debriefs,
Yeah.
which I absolutely loved, because when you're on a mission like that in a Southeast Asian country, Vietnam for example, the days are long. Rehab hospitals we were at were not air conditioned. We're talking like 90 plus degrees, near 100% humidity. And we still what was energizing was coming back, because we all traveled as a group back to the hotel. And then in the lounge or even in the front reception area, we would have a debrief, which was still energizing. So each person that was delivering the training of our team could share what they learned, what they saw, what surprised them, because you always have preconceived visions of what you might see, and it's going to be a routine day. And then
Nothing was ever routine, was it?
No. So it's always nice to do these debriefs, and for the rest of the team to hear how it impacted each other, them as well, and that would help to shape our next day's mission.
And I think you've hit on something very, very important with regard to synergy, because it's not just the relationship that NOJF has had with Rotary, and it's not just about the relationship that NOJF has had with the hospitals and the institutions that we've worked with, but it's also the relationship that we have had with all sorts of professionals who decide to become volunteers on our missions. Yes. And the role that they play and the energy that they bring and the amount of education that they bring. So that synergy really reaches to all kinds of people and needs to be supported by all kinds of people. And in our cases, it sort of filtered down the idea of sustainability from Rotary to us, and then from us to the people who are in the hospitals in Vietnam, and even further to the people that we're training, but also to the people that are coming as professional volunteers. They're thinking about that idea of what do we do and how do we train people so that they will be able to continue doing this even after we've gone home.
Sure. Well, thanks so much. This was very insightful. The whole purpose here is to encourage other chapters of Rotary to consider projects like this, where synergies can combine with local chapters of Rotary, for example. Sustainability right from the start, get the professionals that are taking part in those countries, get their buy-in right from the start, and also allow them to have a part of the planning as well. Yes. Because they will know what will work, and perhaps they could say, no, that isn't going to work here, or you're going to come up against barriers and you don't want to do that because that's just going to slow down the progress. So it's good to get their buy-in. And the last is stewardship. And it sounds like, from Rotary, serve above self, those 3 words, which are also S words, and the core of NOJ was already at service above self. So that partnership that NOJ and Rotary Seed Funding had from the start was probably a very good start to a working relationship. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.